So this one is one of the stories in here, and this is one of the ones where my mom would just do it in such a funny way, so I can hear her. As a little girl, my mom and dad would read stories to my sister and me from a book called My Bible Friends. I remember how my mom brought the stories to life with her playful voice, pretending to be the different characters. When I became a mother, I found myself sharing those same stories with my daughters from the same old books, hoping to pass on the lessons I had learned. In parenting, we need faith. But the same principle applies to all areas of life. Change can happen in an instant. Some changes are welcome, like receiving news of college acceptance, getting a new puppy, or landing a dream job. Others, however, can be unwelcome, like a diagnosis or the loss of a loved one. Years ago, I experienced an event that tested my faith. It started in the basement of AdventHealth Orlando, back then Florida Hospital Orlando. And it was just after 8 o'clock in the morning when we were watching the television and we saw airplanes striking the Trade Center. And I knew that my husband was flying out of Boston that day. And the initial reports were that some of those airplanes that struck the towers, one of them was from Boston. I called anyone I could think of to find out where he was, and no one would answer. You let yourself imagine that he's on that airplane. You're begging for God for that not to be true, and you're filled with anxiety and fear and almost an emptiness because you don't know what's happened. It was about 12 hours later I finally heard from him and knew that he was at least on the ground and he was safe. And I never, up until that point, needed as much faith as I needed it on that day. In moments of fear, I think about the story of Jesus walking on water. After he fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus sent his disciples across the sea while he prayed on the mountain. A terrible storm arose, and they cried out in fear. The next morning, Jesus came down the mountain and began walking on the water to reach them. Peter's faith in Jesus was so strong that he stepped out of the boat and began to walk on water, keeping his eyes fixed on Jesus. But when he looked away, he began to sink, crying out for Jesus to save him. Jesus took Peter's hand and they returned safely to the boat. The storm calmed and the disciples worshipped him, declaring, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Peter walking on water is a story of absolute faith. And I'm sure, just like Peter, I sank into the water because my husband on 9/11, being on an airplane, was one of the scariest moments in my life. But I kept the faith to believe that God had him and that he was safe. If you're facing a change or a challenge, remember Peter's faith. Step out of the boat and take action. Jesus will lead you. The journey might look different for each of us, but even as life brings its share of storms along the way, make room for God to guide you, trusting in his love and remaining rooted in faith.